I've been watching this brand new series on the Disney Plus channel called Moon Knight, which is a Marvel character, and after printing him out in a 3D print, I realised this is a really huge kit, really big figure. It's got to be like 1/6 scale. The detail is really good. I kind of just lost a bit of detail in his face simply because of the way I printed him, and the couple of joints I again had issues with the supports, and I ended up with a bit of a gap in there, which I'm going to have to obviously fill once I glue them. Specifically the cape issues that I had really bothered me, but a bit of glue will do the trick. Now you can see the detail's really good in the arms there, and the legs come up great. It's all good except for the cape. So let's get straight into building it. Just using this super glue here, running it down the middle, and yeah, like I said, you can see the gaps there. And I decided I was going to do something really different compared to the usual putty that I use. And I'm using the resin here and then pulling out the UV torch. For some reason it's coming up blue, but it's actually purple. UV torch actually solidifies the resin, and it's really good. I'm really happy that I'm using it. It fills up the seam really well and it flows down the seam, and once I hit it with the torch, the UV lamp in there, it hardens instantly. And look at that, it's come up really good with minimal amount of sanding on there. And you'll see it's a really rubbish joint here. It's a huge joint, and again it's because of the way I had the support, so it kind of warped a bit while I was printing it. A bit of super glue, and again some more resin to fill it up will do the job. And I'm just kind of pouring it in there in small layers, and then solidifying it with that UV torch again. It's amazing I didn't think of this earlier, but yeah, it's a really good technique. And I thought I might try it for some of these little dimples that are in the leg, and I kind of wasn't really happy with the way it turned out. I had too much overflow on it. And these joints were really good. They were spot on. There was no filling needed in this area at all. And I ended up going back to the Tamiya putty here. And pulled out the Dremel tool and got it roughly to the shape I wanted to. I made up this vacuum here to suck up all the dust. You can see it works really well. And the cutting tool just to get really deep into that seam there. And I've moved on to the 400 grit sandpaper here. Unfortunately, during this process, I've lost a lot of the fabric detail. So if you guys know of any way I can actually keep that detail, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to know. Because the detail in the cape was fantastic, but fortunately lost it. And I've puttied up some of the areas there. And I kind of accidentally cracked one of the corners of the cape. So the easy fix was just to chop it off and round it off using this Dremel tool again. Easiest and best way to fix that issue. And it's looking good. The seams are really good. So it's time to put on the two body halves together. I'm using the 5-minute arrowdite this time rather than the super glue. I need a good strong joint. And just smothering it all over all over the joint. It wasn't a perfect joint. Back to the Tamiya putty, and I kind of just pushed it in there, make sure it goes in really well. And then I just used the glue there, the liquid glue, to thin out the edges. So it was a really nice blend. Because I needed to cut out any type of sanding. But it was after this I decided, you know, I might make myself some sprue glue. And just using the liquid cement, and I've got a couple of bottles, so you know I was quite happy to sacrifice that bottle. And just cutting up little pieces there, making sure they're small enough to actually fit through the nozzle there of the bottle. on how much you actually cut up determines on how thick you want the actual glue to be. Obviously, the more sprue you put in, the thicker it's going to be. And once I've placed all those little bits and pieces in, give it a bit of a stir, make sure the liquid glue actually goes through all the sprue. And then I just put it aside for it to dissolve. Now these joints are really rubbish, they're not very good at all. So a bit of super glue, and I'm so happy I actually made up the sprue glue because that's going to make it so much easier. And I left it overnight for the actual sprue glue to dissolve. And I started off a bit cautious here. And it just flowed perfectly. It was really, really good. In the end, I didn't even need to sand it. All I did was flow it in there and carefully just make sure it's nice and even. And I went into the creases really well, into the joints. Surprised I didn't come up with this earlier. And you can see it's come up great. Look at that. A nice smooth joint. I'm using a combination of 50-50 of the primer and the thinner. Now I've used too much thinner in this. You can see the overspray. And a blow dryer to quickly spray it. And with the undercoat, it shows up some of the blemishes, some of the areas that I missed with the puttying. I need to get in there and actually fix all that up. Give it another coat. And once that was dry, it was a matter of just sanding it down. But I ran into a problem. When I actually sanded it, it was all covered in sanding dust. So I thought, in my wisdom, I'll give it a run underneath the tap. And all the paint, the undercoat just stripped off. It just peeled off. It was an absolute disaster. I think it's possibly because I used too much thinner in the paint. I'm not 100% sure, even maybe because I used water on there. And it just bubbled. It was an absolute disaster. So obviously I had to fix that. So I stripped it down. And you can see during the stripping process, unfortunately, I've lost some of the putty that I had put in. So I have to redo that. And what I used to actually strip it was a spray can of Easy Off, some of this oven cleaner. And all I did was spray the whole figure with the oven cleaner and left it for about 10 minutes. But after that episode, I needed a break, so I moved over to the base. I had to actually print this in two sections because it's way too big for my printer. And I have the Anycubic Mono X, which is a fairly decent size printer, but still the base is way too big. Because of my bad supports, I had a bit of a failure underneath it. It was a matter of gluing it together once again with that 5-minute Aerodite. And I left it for about an hour to make sure it really hardened. And a good old Tamiya putty once again to fill up the joint. And once I actually filled the joint, I just ran my finger and just spread it out and made sure it blended with the surrounding areas. And that came up really well. And there's the undercoat all done. It's all been sanded and filled. Time to give it some depth to it. So I'm using this black paint here. It's heavily watered down. And turned it into wash, and I totally covered the figure with it. And you can see it's really made the detail pop in there. It was time to actually give it a dry brush, and I'm using this light sand from Ammo. They've got a range of dry brush paints which are really, really thick. Really perfect for dry brushing. And you can see the detail straight away pops once I start using this. Now for the dark areas around his wrists, I'm using this dark sea grey, and I've turned that into a wash, and I've thinned it down with water. Using it as a contrast paint, I don't actually have to dry brush it or anything like that. And it's come up really well. figure's got a few areas that need to be painted in gold leaf, and I've used this Tamiya paint in those areas here. This is actually 25-year-old paint that I've had laying around, and it still works great. Now I'm using this off-white for his eyes. White I think will be too stark, so something, slightly off it would be much better. Now I've decided I might add some more highlights, and I'm using the Tamiya flat white and just going around in certain areas. Please do subscribe and hit the notification button and leave a comment. That way it helps the channel grow. Your support will be most welcome. Back onto the base, and I'm going to paint some bricks, just some random ones here and there in this rust colour, light rust. Now some more random bricks in this dark sea grey. And finally the light grey for some more of these bricks. Yeah, I know it looks really stark at the moment, but we'll even it all out in a minute. And once that's all dry, I'm going back to the light grey again. And this time I'm going to give it a dry brush over the whole surface of all the brick areas, just to kind of blend it in. And I'm doing a fairly heavy dry brush over it. Definitely not being delicate at all. And now to do some of the dry brushing with the white here, the Tamiya white paint. And you can see the detail really starting to pop now in the stonework. Now it's time to give the whole base a wash. With this black, I've really thinned it down and just covered the whole area in just black and let it run into all the crevices. I wasn't gentle about this at all. Make sure it accumulates in all the edges there. And once that's dry, you can see how uniform it's now become. I'm going to start adding a whole bunch of detail to it, some foliage and moss. For the foliage, I kind of found these roots that are in my back garden. It's a matter of finding which ones suit, and these, I have no idea what they are, but they look perfect for leaves, dead leaves. They're a bit plain, so I decided I'm going to use a bit of burnt umber. Turned that into a wash and totally covered these little thingamajiggers. Like I said, I have no idea what they are. And some of this debris that I found, I'll use that just to build up in areas where, where stuff just builds up, I guess. Just pushing it willy-nilly around the place. No plan. And making sure that, it'll accumulate, top areas. Once again, in the corners. And what I'm using is PVA glue, which is a wood glue, really thin down. And for the moss, I'm using these foliage clusters. Now, I've never used this stuff before. I didn't realise it was foam, so kind of had to break it up to suit the sizes that I needed. And I started off originally just painting the glue on there and then trying to stick it. It was a bit messy, it didn't quite work, and I found out the best way was to just dip it in the glue first and then stick it down. Now I'm using this moss to basically cover all the faulty areas that didn't print very well. I really need to focus on getting better prints. And now I'm giving it a raw umber wash and just knocking off some of that really stark green to it. Make it look like a little bit like it dried out a bit more. And you can see it's looking good. Now it's time for the vines. This is really more like trial and error. It's just finding pieces that'll kind of suit and turning them around, snipping them down. And I just use super glue to put them into place. But then I kind of thought, you know, what might be better was not only a bit of super glue, but also a bit of some of this stuff that's called Rapid Fix. And all that stuff is just baking soda. And using the Rapid Fix really works well in this instance because it's not a quite uniform joint. You just pour a bit of glue in there, then pour in the Rapid Fix, and it makes a great joint. You know, I do need to hide them, so it was a matter of covering them, the joints up with a bit more moss and then giving it a bit more wash as well. And that's what we end up with. And that's come up really, really good. I'm really happy with that base there. It's time to glue the Moon Knight onto the base. Now again, back to the 5-minute araldite. And I'm just covering it, just pouring a whole bunch of it on there. Moon Knight is actually standing on the base, but he's kind of on his toes. Did need to put a bit of a wedge behind his back heel there, just to prop him up. And then I left him for about an hour to dry up. And the final bit was to add these leaves that I had painted earlier. This has come up so well, and really happy with the base. I think we need to see the whole figure, so it's time for the hero shots.